It is 9 o'clock. Hello, welcome everyone to the Day 2 morning session of the 2020 Arkansas Monarch and Pollinator Forum. To keep this session running smoothly, if you have your video on, I'd ask you to turn it off and also mute your microphones. And now I will give the floor to Dr. Ray Moranz with the Xerces Society, and I will let him do his own introductions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ray Moranz. I live in Stillwater, Oklahoma, but I work for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation and for the USD NRCS, and my role is to help both organizations with pollinator conservation in the central US. And the focus, of course, of my talk today, the title is Evaluating Habitat Using the NRCS WHEG and the Xerces HAG. And then there's a surprise at the end that I think folks are going to enjoy. So I'll get going. What is a WHEG? WHEG is an NRCS acronym standing for Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Guide. These WHEGs are tools, and NRCS creates them for various wildlife species to help us conserve individual species, or we create them for various land uses that are relevant as wildlife habitat. So up top, of course, up top you see a bison. You could create a bison WHEG, or you could create a WHEG for pasture. This pasture is in western Arkansas. Why a WHEG? Well, the purposes of a WHEG are to evaluate benchmark conditions, in this case for monarch habitat, to present management alternatives to the landowner, to predict, oh gosh, I keep thinking I can click with a pointer, but I can't. That advances the slide. To predict what the plan conditions would be like if you implement certain practices, and then you can use the WHEG after you implement conservation to monitor if habitat condition has improved. So from a very practical standpoint, why a WHEG? I think the Monarch WHEG is very important for folks to use, especially with NRCS, but anyone listening right now could use the Monarch WHEG to evaluate monarch habitat. And I'll use this photo as an example. This is at a site somewhere in the United States that I visited sometime in the past, where NRCS folks told me they were going to put in monarch habitat. This is a right-of-way. Obviously, they're gonna leave the pine forest on the sides, but they want to plant monarch habitat in the right-of-way. And I asked, "Have you run the WHEG?" And they said no. And then I started looking down, and I started seeing this. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is Helianthus angustifolius, swamp sunflower. And I saw a lot of these, probably hundreds, if not thousands. This is a good nectar plant for monarchs. And we were at a sort of bad time of year to be looking for these things. But the main idea was this site probably had tons of great nectar sources and probably some milkweeds. And so folks were thinking about spending money on killing all this stuff and then replanting, probably a big mistake. So it's a good idea to run the WHEG to see what you've got. There is a procedural need within the NRCS for a WHEG. The NRCS considers monarch butterflies to be wildlife. The NRCS National Biologist in DC oversees wildlife conservation for the agency, and recently she informed me that NRCS written policy requires the use of an approved habitat evaluation tool, like a WHEG, anywhere in the nation that wildlife is the focus of NRCS conservation efforts. So yes, a WHEG or something like it should be used, technically speaking, by NRCS staff anywhere where they are working with monarchs in the nation. The specific WHEG I want to talk about is the West Gulf Coastal Plain WHEG. The reference domain of that WHEG, you can see here on the map, was mainly for the piney woods of the coastal plain, East Texas, western Louisiana, southern Arkansas. However, at the permission of Arkansas NRCS, this WHEG could be used just about anywhere in Arkansas. So if you're anywhere in Arkansas, and I think just about everybody here is except me, this WHEG could be useful to you. The WHEG actually consists of 3 separate documents. And by the way, the authors of the WHEG are listed above. James Baker, Russell Castro, Troy Malik, and me. But yes, it's 3 documents. On the left, we're showing the front page of the instructions. In the middle, the data sheet. And on the right, the prettiest document of the 3, our Important Plants Guide. And that's one that I encourage everybody on this call to obtain. All 3 are free. The one on the right's the most handy for everyone. So the WHEG instructions is a 10-page document providing detailed instructions on each step of the habitat evaluation process. It goes through every little detail of it. 10 pages is a lot to read, but it's a lot better than what the people in the Midwest are subject to. Their instructions are 30 pages long. Here is the front page of the WHEG data sheet. It's an Excel file, actually consists of multiple pages, and the NRCS Monarch planner, or anybody who's using this document, would take this out into the field with them, take a printout with them, and fill it in, and then come back and do some calculations and determine whether or not the habitat is poor or fair. If the habitat is poor or fair, then it's worthy of being improved. If it's already excellent, there's no point in doing any conservation there for monarchs. It's already excellent. It'd be a waste of money to put a lot of money into it. Okay. The third document, as I mentioned, the prettiest of them is the Monarch Plant Identification Guide. It's 104 pages, and it is useful to have even if you never evaluate habitat. This document has an inventory plant list. This is the most important aspect of the document, really. This is the list of plants that you search for when visiting a site. The Xerces Society, my employer, has done an analysis, has collected data, and the plants in this list are the plants that we have found are being used by monarchs in this region. I'm sure there are more, and I actually want to hear about what other species are being used. I want you folks to tell me. But when you go out into the field, you would take this list with you and look for these plants. Then, most of the document is species accounts like this one, 2 pages for each species. So you see on the left, we're featuring aquatic milkweed, a range map, a photo, lots of text, and on the right, many more 4 more photos of aquatic milkweed to help you identify the plant. So this Important Plants Guide, I think, is a useful tool to take out in the field to identify good plants for monarchs. And it features about 50 or 60 species. This document also has a monarch planting list. These are the species that we recommend planting for monarchs. Obviously, there's a lot of correspondence between the previous list, the inventory list, and the planting list that I'm showing you now. To find these documents, to find all 3 of these WHEG documents, go to the NRCS Monarchs webpage. To find that page easily, simply search NRCS Monarchs. Once again, that's NRCS Monarchs. Once you get to that page, go to the very bottom of the page. It's going to look like this. And these documents that I'm circling down near the bottom of the slide, those are the components of the WHEG. I need to apologize. We've made a mistake. The instructions, if you click on that instructions link, you will not get the instructions. You'll get another copy of the data sheet. So we need to fix that. So in the meantime, before we fix that, I discovered this last night. If you need the instructions, please email me and I will email the instructions directly to you. But believe it or not, it takes someone to DC to modify this website, so it's going to take a few days. First step of running the WHEG is to develop a map of your project and to develop your assessment areas. Each different assessment area, they're different because they differ in their land use or something like that. You're going to run a separate WHEG for each one. And then step 2 is to do a rapid screening. The rapid screening is on page 1 of the data sheet, and it looks like, oh gosh, looks like this. Gotta remember not to click. We do this rapid screening, of course, to save time. We don't want you to waste time evaluating monarch habitat in a cornfield. So you take this out in the field with you, or even, actually, you could skip going to the field. If you know that this landowner has a dense forest and they want it to stay dense forest, then you know you're not going to put monarch habitat there because monarchs don't use dense forest typically. If it's crop, you don't need to go out and evaluate the site because you know milkweeds and nectar sources typically aren't growing out in the middle of a cornfield. But if the landowner is willing to convert his or her cornfield, a few acres of it, to monarch habitat, then we're in business. But again, if it's crop, you don't need to go out and evaluate the habitat. If it's intensively managed hay, intensively managed pasture, or woody noxious plants, same thing. You don't need to go out and collect data in the field. All you need to find out is if the landowner is willing to make a big change. On the other hand, if you have other herbaceous plant communities that might be monarch habitat, you should go out to the field to see if it is monarch habitat. And here is an example of some sites. The one on the left is so brushy that you probably don't need to waste your time going out in the field to evaluate it. It's not very good monarch habitat. Here on the right, it's still brushy, but less so. The areas without the cedars could be monarch habitat. I would go out and evaluate that. Okay. Also, as part of this process, you need to assess the pesticide risk from herbicides and enter the score. You need to assess the risk from from insecticides and enter the score on your data sheet. If the landowner is spraying lots of insecticides in the area, on the area that they want to plant as monarch habitat and they're not willing to stop, then that's not acceptable for monarch conservation because obviously insecticides can kill monarchs. However, if they're willing to do some mitigation measures, then we could be in business. Here is the heart of the WHEG, and that is going out and sampling vegetation. Pick 3 sites at your assessment area. At each site, run a tape, measure 72.6 feet long, and then go 3 feet to either side. This happens to be, is it 1/100th? I think this is 100. I can't remember if it's 100th or 1,000th of an acre. This area is what you will assess for milkweed abundance and for nectaring plant abundance and nectar for species richness. So at each of those 3 transects that you've created, count your milkweed stem density, walk the full distance to the transect, noting the presence of milkweed plants emerging from within that belt transect. And then on that same belt transect, create 3 squares, each square 6 feet by 6 feet. There's one here, one here, one here, and within each of those squares, look for forb species richness and forb cover. So if this is one of our squares, how many monarch nectar forb species are present here? Is Queen Anne's lace a good monarch nectar plant? No. We know it's not because it's not on our inventory plant list. Is this Retibita species good? No, not really. It's not on our list either, to my memory. But we have a species over here. I'm sorry, something's missing on, whoops. But we have a species over here, golly, that is good. So the next step After you've collected all the data and entered it and run the calculations, you develop a conservation plan to address the habitat needs. And hopefully you're able to provide assistance to the landowner and implement conservation. Eventually, a year or two later, it would be nice to follow up and evaluate the habitat implementation. Next, I'll talk about something related but different, assessing pollinator habitat using the Xerces Society's Habitat Assessment Guide, known as the HAG. There are two different HAGs for pollinators. The one on the left is for farms. The one on the right is for natural areas and rangelands. And the basic idea of either of these HAGs, either of these habitat assessment guides, is to look at landscape level characteristics and site level characteristics. It is a subjective tool. You're going out, and to a large degree, you're saying, is there a good, main idea behind this is different people going to the same site will come up with different results, slightly different results, but hey, nothing's perfect. So some of the things that you measure using a HAG would be landscape features. For instance, ideally, you would look at a map, at an aerial photograph, and try to quantify what % of the area within 1/2 of the mile of farm is natural or semi-natural vegetation. The more natural or semi-natural vegetation within a half mile of the farm, the better, and the higher your score. So you're going to be entering scores here before conservation efforts and after conservation efforts, and obviously you can tally these up at the end. Other features we look for, the farmscape. What % of your farm is in natural or semi-natural habitat? For instance, down here in this photo on the left, we've got lots of crops, but we've also have some natural habitat in between, which is really good for pollinators. There are a whole bunch of additional farm features that you could look at, such as permanent meadows, pasture that has a high % of non-invasive flowering plants, such as red clover or alfalfa. Those can be good for pollinators, so on and so forth. Next, you want to focus on foraging habitat. The overall vegetative cover. So what % of your property has flowering plants, particularly native plants? Is it above 50% or below 10%? Most farms are going to be down at the low levels, and we understand that, but our hope is that we assess where we are and then try to increase that. Next aspect is to count the number of species of wildflowers you have in each season. In spring, for instance, how many species? Do you have 0 species blooming in spring or 7 or more species blooming in spring? Do the same thing for summer. Summer tends to be a time where we have a very high abundance of forage plants, native forage plants, and also fall bloomers. It's harder to get the spring bloomers. Next, you would focus on nesting habitat, including habitat for ground nesting bees. Ground nesting bees like untilled ground, they like bare ground. So your farm would get 1 point for every 10% of the farm that is untilled. And of course, numerous other characteristics that you could look for. A whole bunch of our bee species, about 30% of them nest in wood or cavities. So your property would get a higher score if it has rock piles or snags or plants with hollow or pithy centers to hide in. And we're getting close to the end of this section. Farm management practices. There are non-chemical things you can do that would increase your score. And even if you are using chemicals, there are mitigation efforts that you can be making to decrease the decrease the risk of those insecticides on pollinators. Finally, there are some large-scale activities you can be doing, like prescribed fire and prescribed grazing, and perhaps haying or mowing, that, if done right, can enhance pollinator habitat. And to sum it all up, you add up all the scores that you've obtained for all the earlier parts, all the earlier sections, and you get an overall score. And hopefully, we're going to bet that if you do this a few years after you implement conservation, you're going to get a higher after score than you get before. And now for the surprise that I mentioned earlier, and that is Arkansas NRCS has commissioned a pollinator conservation handbook. The cover page is shown on the left. It might not be the most recent cover page because this document is not quite published yet. It has been in development since late 2018. Its creation has been coordinated by my colleague Nancy Adamson, but it's been very much of a team effort with massive contributions by Leslie Cooper and Ryan Diener, among others. I say massive, it's approximately 150 pages. This document has got to be the most complete document on pollinator conservation ever developed for the state of Arkansas. I would be shocked if there's something more all-inclusive than this. We anticipate that the PDF of this document will be published soon at the Arkansas NRCS website. Leslie probably has a better idea of when than I do. This document is very beautifully illustrated, and almost every photo within comes from Arkansas and Arkansas photographers. This document has multiple chapters on what I consider very interesting topics, like how to recognize habitat, protecting pollinators in their habitat, enhancing and developing new habitat, and so on. We've got a section on the variety of native bees, beautifully illustrated with some pretty fantastic photos. And there's some extremely helpful and in-depth tables towards the back with lists of native plants for pollinators. This is only a very tiny section of the table for native forms for pollinators, which I believe includes a few hundred species. So please be on the lookout for the publication of this document. Perhaps Leslie can share when it will be published. I apologize that I do not know. I mentioned earlier that to help us plant monarch habitat, we need to know what plants they like. And to know what plants they like, we need data from you. So if you've ever seen monarchs using native plants in Arkansas, please send us your records. You can see what I have here is a portion of the database, and we have this portion shows a lot of records from Texas, and that's true. We have lots from Texas, we have lots from the Midwest, we have very few from Arkansas. So if you've seen monarchs using native plants in Arkansas, please email me at ray.moranz@xerces.org. And I'll show that email again in a few moments. I want to give thanks to Leslie and to Arkansas NRCS for inviting me. And I want to thank Nancy Adamson for her fantastic work on the Pollinator Handbook. As an employee of the Xerces Society, I have to give thanks to our many donors who help keep me employed and doing the work of my dreams, conserving butterflies and other pollinators. And I want to point out that we are a donor-supported nonprofit organization, and we would appreciate your membership. And I do want to add that on Wednesday, December 2nd, I will be co-hosting a webinar on creating and managing monarch habitat in the southeastern United States using Farm Bill programs. This is the third part of a three-part series. You can go to see the other parts or meet us on Wednesday, December 2nd for this upcoming one by going to the website conservationwebinars.net. Once again, conservationwebinars.net. Thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Ray. That was a great presentation. A lot of great resources for planners and others, working to create more monarch and pollinator habitat. So if you're joining us on Zoom, please type any questions that you have into the chat box. If you're viewing on Facebook Live, please add them to the comment section, and I'd be happy to give to have right answers. There we go. Let's see. You mentioned that mowing done right could benefit pollinators. Could you please elaborate, Ray?
Sure. Mowing done right, I'd say the first guideline of mowing done right is low frequency. So mowing every week would be disastrous for pollinators. Mowing once or twice a year could be phenomenal. Mowing once a year, I know this is not ideal for grassland nesting birds, but for monarchs at least, mowing in late June, early July, and you could even move that into mid-July. If you mow grassland at that point and you have milkweeds, that mowing is likely to stimulate, it's been proven to stimulate some milkweed species to resprout, providing plenty of milkweed foliage for monarchs in August and September. I know in Oklahoma, and I believe it's true for Arkansas as well, that we have quite an important breeding season for monarchs in August and September. Pollinators at large can benefit by disturbance in late June or early July. It gives time for our fall blooming species to resprout and actually results in an increase of floral abundance of numerous species.
Awesome, thank you, Ray. Let's see, I'll give it a few more seconds to give people a chance to type in any additional questions. Let's see. So Ray, you mentioned that you know, these resources were available online.
Yep.
Who are these documents really meant for? Can anyone use them, or do they have to be conservation planners?
Anyone can use any document that I mentioned in this webinar. The Monarch WHEG, which is what I started with, was designed by NRCS for NRCS use, but anyone can use it. And as I showed, you can go to the website and download them for free, obviously. And the Xerces HAG, the Habitat Assessment Guide, that is meant for anybody in the world to use. Yes, any of these documents are it's totally acceptable for anyone. We encourage folks to use both of these documents.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ray. I'll welcome our next speaker to share his screen. And if you have any questions, you know, Ray put up his contact information, and you're also free to send me an email, and I'd be happy to connect you with Ray or send you any of those additional resources.